Part 1. The evening rush had just started when a young waitress moved quietly between the tables, carrying a tray with practiced care. She wasn't the kind of person anyone noticed at first glance. She kept her head slightly down, her steps light, and her voice soft enough that customers sometimes had to lean in to hear her. Most people in the restaurant only knew her as the polite girl who always remembered their orders and never complained. No matter how busy it got, she had been working at the restaurant for almost a year. Ever since life had taken a turn she never saw coming. Every day she arrived a little early, tied her apron around her waist, tucked her hair behind her ears, and prepared herself for hours of serving tables, refilling glasses, and smiling even when she felt exhausted inside that her co-workers liked her, but none of them really knew her. She wasn't unfriendly, just someone who kept her thoughts close and didn't talk much about her personal life. Still, there was something calming about her presence. Whenever she walked by, people felt she carried some quiet strength with her, even if they couldn't explain why. The restaurant itself was the kind of place where wealthy families celebrated birthdays. Business deals were whispered over fancy meals, and couples came to mark anniversaries. Soft music usually floated in the background, played by a hired pianist who sat near the center of the room. But on that particular night, the music had stopped even before the first guests arrived. The pianist had called in sick with barely any notice. And now the manager was pacing back and forth, trying to figure out what to do. His frustration echoed through the kitchen as he muttered about how the guests expected a perfect evening, especially since the restaurant was hosting a private celebration for important visitors, while the staff buzzed around, preparing dishes and setting tables. The waitress stood near the counter folding napkins. She listened quietly to the manager's worried voice, but kept her eyes down. She knew better than to offer suggestions. She wasn't the type to step into the middle of problems that weren't hers. Still, part of her felt uneasy hearing the tension in the room. She wished she could help, even though she knew there was nothing she could do. At least, that's what she believed. As she worked, her thoughts drifted far from the noise of the kitchen. She remembered mornings when she used to wake up to the sound of music at Home Beautiful, warm music that filled every corner of the house. She remembered sitting on a wooden bench with her small fingers pressing gently against piano keys. She remembered her mother's patient voice guiding her. Those memories were soft and gentle, something she kept tucked away like a fragile treasure. But life had changed. After she lost her mother, the music slowly faded from her home. She stopped practicing, stopped dreaming about concerts, stopped believing that music would take her anywhere. It wasn't because she lost her love for it. It was because life had become too heavy, too demanding. Her father needed her. Bills needed paying. Dreams had to wait. She took a breath and pulled herself back to the moment. The sound of the manager's voice rose again, sharper than before. What are we supposed to do now? We can't have a night like this without music, he exclaimed. A few co-workers exchanged looks, shrugging helplessly. No one there knew how to play an instrument, let alone fill in for a professional pianist. The thought alone seemed impossible. Then one of the servers laughed lightly and said, "Well, she used to play the piano, right?" He pointed toward the quiet waitress without thinking much of it. She froze. The napkin in her hands slipped a little as her heart skipped. She looked up slowly, her eyes wide with surprise. "What?" she whispered. The manager turned sharply. You can play?" She felt her face warm. I used to. A long time ago. But I'm not. Can you play anything? Even something simple?" he asked, his voice full of hope, not pressure. She hesitated. Just hearing the question made her stomach twist. She hadn't touched a piano in years. Her hands carried trays now, not melodies. Her life had no space for music anymore. But the manager looked genuinely desperate. and all the staff were watching her with such hopeful eyes that she didn't know how to say no. "I don't know if I'm good anymore," she murmured. "That's fine," he replied. "Just something soft. Something to fill the silence. It doesn't have to be perfect. Please." She swallowed. Inside her mind, memories stirred her mother's gentle smile. The feeling of keys beneath her fingers. The way the music used to flow from her like it belonged to her dot slowly. She nodded. "I can try." As the words left her mouth, she felt a strange mixture of fear and calm settle over her. The decision was made. She didn't know why she agreed. Maybe it was because she didn't want to see the manager so stressed. Maybe it was because part of her missed the piano more than she allowed herself to admit. The manager's shoulders relaxed with relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much. You'll just play when the guests arrive and stop whenever you need to. Don't worry about anything else. Just play something gentle." She nodded again, though she felt her heartbeat thumping faster with every second. As she walked toward the piano, she wiped her palms against her apron, trying to steady her breathing. The grand piano sat quietly in the center of the room, covered in a slight reflection from the warm overhead lights. It felt strange seeing it, after so long both familiar and distant at the same time. She sat down slowly, almost afraid. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling. She didn't press down yet. She simply stared at them, as if waiting for some old part of herself to wake up. She tried a single note. It was soft, pure, and it echoed gently through the empty restaurant. The sound made her close her eyes. It reminded her so much of home that she had to take a deep breath to steady herself. She touched another note, then another. Her fingers felt stiff at first, like they weren't sure how to move. But after a minute, the movement became smoother, more natural. The sound wrapped around her like a warm blanket. She had long forgotten Dot in that quiet moment. Alone with the piano, she felt something inside her stir, something she hadn't felt in years. A spark, a small, gentle spark. But then footsteps approached, and she opened her eyes. The manager was standing nearby, watching her carefully. "That sounded lovely," he said. "Just keep it simple like that." "It's perfect." She nodded, though she didn't think it sounded perfect at all. Yet she didn't argue. She didn't trust her voice not to tremble. Soon the doors would open, and guests would start pouring in. She would be sitting here, playing in front of strangers, wearing her apron and work clothes. It felt embarrassing, strange, and frightening. But something deeper inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe this moment mattered. She placed her hands gently on the keys again and let out a slow breath. She wasn't ready, but she would try. And that one small choice would change the rest of her life. Even though she had no idea yet. She only knew that she was a waitress, sitting at a piano after years of silence, hoping she wouldn't disappoint anyone. She didn't know that soon. She wouldn't just be part of the background. She would become the center of the night. Part 2. The moment she agreed to play, the whole night seemed to shift around her. She could feel it in the air, like the restaurant itself was holding its breath. But she didn't have much time to think about it, because as soon as the doors opened, the first guests began to arrive. She stood up from the piano quickly and stepped aside to help with greeting people, thinking she would get a little more time before having to play. But the manager gave her a gentle nod, reminding her silently that the moment was coming. She swallowed hard and tried to smile as she guided a couple to their table. The room filled fast. Laughter, greetings, and clinking glasses echoed around her. It was a big night. A private celebration had been booked by a group of influential business leaders and a few well-known artists who were gathering for a special occasion. She recognized a few familiar faces from magazines or online articles, though she never expected to see any of them this close. A soft nervousness built in her chest. These weren't just everyday customers. These were people who lived in a different world, successful, confident, and used to things being perfect. And tonight, she was supposed to sit at a grand piano in front of them. Not because she was a musician anymore, but because she was the only option. She kept moving back and forth between the tables, serving drinks, adjusting cutlery, and making sure guests had everything they needed. But her eyes kept drifting toward the piano, almost like it was calling her. The thought made her uneasy. When the manager approached her again, the room was nearly full. "It's time," he whispered. Her stomach tightened. Her hands shook slightly, but she wiped them on her apron and tried to steady her breathing. She nodded softly and made her way toward the piano. She could feel people noticing her as she walked. Not in a harsh way, more in a curious way. After all, it wasn't every day that a waitress sat down at a grand piano in the middle of such a formal event. She sat on the piano bench, but before she placed her hands on the keys, she looked around the room. Everyone seemed busy with their conversations. No one was paying direct attention to her. That gave her a tiny bit of comfort. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a slow breath, reminding herself that she didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to help fill the silence. Her fingers touched the keys. The first few notes were shaky, like her confidence. But she kept going, choosing a simple tune, one she had played hundreds of times when she was younger. A soft melody that her mother used to hum while making breakfast. The sound floated through the air so gently that most guests didn't even realize the music had started. But as she continued, the melody became smoother. Her hands remembered the movements better than her mind did. It was strange, almost like her fingers carried their own memory. She kept her eyes lowered, not ready to look at anyone. She didn't want to see confusion or judgment on their faces. She only wanted to focus on the sound. After a few minutes, something unexpected happened. The room felt different, softer. The conversation seemed calmer. Someone near the back turned slightly, trying to see who was playing. A couple seated near the front exchanged a surprised smile when they noticed it was the young waitress on the piano. She caught their expression from the corner of her eye and felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't stop. She tried to steady her breathing and let the music guide her. The longer she played, the more a small sense of peace grew inside her. It reminded her of who she used to be, someone who loved music more than anything, someone who believed it could change her life. But she didn't allow herself to get lost in that feeling. She kept the melody simple, gentle, and calm. Something safe. The manager walked by and gave her a reassuring nod. His expression told her she was doing well, and that allowed her to relax just a little. The night went on like that for a while. She played, served, played again, then returned to work. It felt strange switching between two worlds so quickly, but the guests seemed to enjoy the atmosphere the music created. As more people noticed her at the piano, she could feel eyes following her curiously. Some whispered to each other, surprised that someone so quiet, someone they barely saw, was playing so beautifully. One table in particular caught her attention. Sitting there were two well-known guests who had arrived slightly later than the others. One was a writer who had published best-selling books. The other was a music producer whose name she had heard countless times before. She didn't want to stare, but she could feel their gaze now and then, like they were trying to understand who she was. During a short break, she carried a tray to their table. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed their drinks down. The writer smiled politely. "Is that you playing the piano?" She froze for a second. Yes, sir. Just something simple." "It's lovely," he replied in a gentle tone. The producer watched her carefully, not in a harsh way, but with focused interest. "How long have you been playing?" She felt her throat tighten. She didn't want to talk about her past, but she couldn't ignore the question. "Since I was little," she answered quietly. "But it's been a long time." The producer nodded slowly, like he was thinking about something. But he didn't ask more questions, and she was grateful for that dot. She moved away quickly after that, not wanting to linger. Her heart was racing, not because she feared they'd judge her, but because their attention made her uncomfortable. She wasn't used to being noticed. She wasn't used to being seen at all. When she returned to the piano again, something inside her felt different. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the words from the writer, or the focused look from the producer. Maybe it was the memory of her mother's encouragement. Or maybe it was the way the room softened every time she played. She sat down slowly, her fingers hovering above the keys again. She could hear the gentle chatter around her, the clinking glasses, the soft laughter from different corners of the room. She decided to play a slightly more emotional piece, not too complex, but one that held more meaning for her. A piece she remembered playing on a rainy afternoon years ago, when she was trying to distract her mind from the pain of losing her mother. As the melody began, her hands moved more confidently. The notes carried emotions she didn't say out loud. They told stories she never shared. Memories, hopes, quiet dreams. Something magical happened then. The room began to grow still. One by one, people lifted their heads. Conversations faded. A few guests turned their chairs slightly toward the piano. Someone near the middle whispered, "Who is she?" She felt it, the shift. The room wasn't just listening now. They were feeling. Her heart beat faster, but she didn't stop. She didn't need to look up to know the room's attention had settled on her. She could feel it in the air, a kind of silent awe. Her music, simple and unpolished, was reaching people in a way she didn't expect. Her eyes grew glossy, but she blinked the tears back. She didn't want anyone to see them. When the piece ended, the silence in the room lasted longer than she expected. A soft wave of applause followed, gentle but sincere. She looked up slowly, unsure how to react. The guests weren't clapping because she was a waitress trying her best. They were clapping because they felt something. She offered a shy smile, her cheeks warm with embarrassment, and then stood up. She didn't want too much attention, so she returned to her regular work as quickly as she could. But the room wasn't the same afterward. Everywhere she went, people looked at her with new eyes. Soft smiles, curious glances, respect. Even though she tried to stay calm, a quiet flame had been lit inside her. She didn't know what it meant yet. She didn't know where it would lead. All she knew was that playing the piano again, really playing, had awakened a part of her she thought she had lost forever. And even though she was still just a waitress in everyone's eyes, something told her this night was only the beginning. She had no idea how right she was. Part 3. When she finished her last round of serving, the night had already moved into its warmest, busiest hours. The chatter of the guests had grown livelier, and the clink of glasses echoed gently through the restaurant. The lights glowed softly, giving everything a comfortable, golden tone. But even with the busy atmosphere, the room still carried traces of the calm that her music had brought earlier. She stood near the back for a moment, catching her breath. She didn't get many breaks, but she didn't mind. Serving tables was familiar. It was the part of the night she knew well. But the piano, that was different. Playing had stirred something inside her that she didn't expect, something that made her feel more alive than she had felt in years. Still, her heart was unsettled. Not in a bad way, but in a way that made her feel like a door had opened somewhere inside her. And now she didn't know whether she should walk through it or close it again. The manager approached her again. "Guests are asking if you'll play another piece," he said gently. She swallowed, feeling that familiar nervousness return. "Right now?" "Yes, if you're comfortable," he said. "You don't have to." but they seem really moved by your playing earlier." She looked toward the piano. It sat in the center of the room, gleaming softly under the warm lights. She was afraid, but she also felt the pull gentle but steady. "I can play again," she whispered. She made her way toward the piano, slowly, feeling many eyes shift toward her. Not judging, just curious. She could feel the quiet attention follow her as she sat down again. This time, instead of looking at her hands, she took a moment to look around the room. People leaned in their chairs slightly toward her. A few guests smiled softly, encouraging her without words. Her hands hovered over the keys. Her fingers trembled again, but not from fear alone. It was something deeper, nerves mixed with excitement, uncertainty mixed with hope. The first note she played was gentle, like a whisper. Then another. Then a small river of soft notes flowed from her hands. She chose a melody she hadn't played in years, one she had created herself when she was younger. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't professional, but it was honest. Slowly, she let her hands remember the tune. She let her heart guide the rhythm. Even if her mind worried she might make a mistake. As she played, she heard the room grow quiet again. Not silent, but softly attentive like. The music pulled people into a peaceful place inside themselves. The music wasn't loud or dramatic. It was gentle, almost like a secret being shared. A melody built from small memories, old dreams, and quiet hopes she didn't speak about. Her fingers began to move more freely as the fear slowly faded. The worry of doing something wrong softened. The more she played, the more she felt the old version of herself come alive, the one who believed that music meant something, the one who believed that she was meant for more. She didn't know how long she played. Time didn't feel the same when she sat at the piano. But when she paused, when the final notes faded into the air, she looked up again. The guests were silent for a moment. Then the applause began, not loud or wild, but full of warmth. Real appreciation, real feeling. She lowered her head shyly, feeling her cheeks warm. She stood quickly, hoping not to create too much attention, but the gentle applause followed her as she stepped away. She returned to her work with quiet steps, but her heart was still playing. She could feel the music inside her like a warm glow. While she refilled glasses at one of the tables, the writer from earlier gave her a friendly nod. "You're full of surprises," he said kindly. She smiled softly, unsure how to answer, but the producer said nothing this time. He just watched her with thoughtful eyes, as if he were trying to understand the story behind her music. The rest of the night continued with its usual energy. People talked, laughed, toasted, and enjoyed their meals. But their conversations often circled back to her. Who is she? She plays beautifully. I didn't know she could do that. I wonder where she learned. She heard these whispers as she passed between tables, though no one asked her directly. She wasn't used to attention, and even though it made her nervous, it also made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time seen. Near the end of the night, when the guests were finishing their desserts, the producer stood up and walked toward the piano. She was nearby, collecting empty glasses, when she noticed him testing a few keys gently, almost thoughtfully. "You play like someone who's been trained," he said without turning around. She froze for a moment, unsure if he was speaking to her or simply thinking aloud. "I haven't played seriously in years," she replied quietly. He turned and looked at her, not in a harsh way, not in a demanding way, but with genuine curiosity. "Talent doesn't disappear," he said. "It just waits." Her heart skipped out. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not ones that carried weight. He stepped away from the piano and stood in front of her, keeping a comfortable distance. "Your music had emotion," he said. "Real emotion. That's not something you can teach." She lowered her eyes, feeling shy and unsure. "I just tried my best." "Your best," he said with a small smile, "is better than many professionals I've heard." She felt a spark of disbelief. I'm not that good. Maybe not trained anymore," he added. "But the heart you play with, that matters more than perfect technique." Before she could respond, the manager called her name from across the room. She excused herself quickly and hurried back to work, still feeling the weight of the producer's words in her chest. The night eventually wound down. Guests put on their coats, thanked the staff, and slowly began leaving the restaurant. The room grew quieter with each minute, the energy settling into a peaceful hum. When the final guests walked out, the staff gathered to clean up. She rolled up her sleeves and helped carry trays, wipe tables, and stack dishes. But every now and then, she caught the producer glancing her way. He wasn't being intrusive, just thoughtful, like he was still considering something. Finally, when she walked past him on her way to the kitchen, he stopped her gently. "Have you ever thought about playing again?" he asked. She froze. The question felt too big, too heavy. "Yes," she whispered. "But life changed. I didn't think I'd get another chance." He nodded slowly. "Life changes for all of us. But talent like yours shouldn't stay hidden. If you ever want to try again, even just to see how far you can go, I would be happy to help." Her breath caught. He wasn't offering money. He wasn't offering fame. He wasn't offering guarantees. He was offering a chance she never thought she'd get. Before she could respond, he added, "You don't have to decide now. Think about it. And if you want to talk, the manager knows how to reach me." She nodded quietly, unable to find her voice. She watched him walk away, his steps calm and unhurried. When she finally returned to the changing room to take off her apron, her hands trembled not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming mix of hope and uncertainty. She sat down on the small bench and held her apron in her lap. Her thoughts raced. Was this really happening? Could the life she once dreamed of be opening its doors again? Or was she imagining everything too brightly? She remembered the feeling of playing, the way the notes flowed, the way the room softened, the way her heart felt light for the first time in years. She wanted that feeling again, but she also feared it. Dreams had hurt her before, especially after she lost her mother. Giving up music had been painful, but it had protected her from further disappointment. Now, for the first time in a long time, she wondered whether protecting herself had also been holding her back. When she walked out of the restaurant at the end of the night, the cold air hit her gently. She looked up at the sky, clear and full of stars. Breath formed a small white cloud in the night air. Something inside her whispered that life was changing. Again, slowly, quietly, but real. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. Not tonight. Tonight. She had been something more. And deep inside her, a small, brave thought formed. Maybe she was meant to follow that feeling. Maybe music wasn't a closed door. After all. Maybe it was waiting for her to knock. Here is part 4. The moment the hall fell silent, it felt as if the whole world had stopped breathing. The young girl stood there, her fingers still resting lightly on the piano keys, almost as if she wasn't sure what had just happened. For a second, she wondered if she had imagined the sound of her own performance, if maybe her mind had created something bigger than reality. But then she heard it. A single clap, soft at first, then another, and another. Within moments, the entire hall erupted in applause so loud it almost echoed like thunder. The director sat frozen in his chair, completely unsure of what to say or what expression to make. His face had gone pale, his jaw slightly open, and his glasses had slipped down the bridge of his nose. He had seen many performances in his lifetime, some brilliant, some terrible, and many that were simply ordinary. But what he had just heard from the young girl wasn't something that fit into any normal category. There was something raw, something powerful in the way she played, something that didn't come from training or expensive lessons. It came from the kind of heart that couldn't be taught. She slowly pulled her hands away from the piano and looked around, unsure of how to react to the explosion of applause. She had never performed in front of a crowd before. She had never imagined it either. She had only ever played when she was alone, when no one was watching, when she believed nobody would ever care to listen. But here she was in a grand hall, surrounded by people who didn't know her name or her story, yet were cheering for her as though she had been the star of the night. In the front row, the older woman who worked in the cleaning staff wiped tears from her eyes. She had always believed the girl had something special inside her, but she never found the words to explain it. And even if she tried, who would have listened? People like them usually didn't get noticed. They worked quietly, stayed out of the way, and kept to themselves. But now everyone was looking at the girl, really looking at her. The applause didn't stop. It kept growing, wave after wave of admiration, appreciation, and complete astonishment. Some people stood from their seats. Others whistled and shouted in support. Even the musicians who had been rehearsing earlier were stunned, whispering to one another with wide eyes. The director finally stood up, but his legs trembled slightly. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, then cleared it again because his voice didn't come out the first time. He walked toward the stage slowly, as if unsure whether he should be angry, thrilled, or embarrassed for what he had said earlier. When he reached the bottom of the stage steps, he stopped, looked up at her, and sighed softly. The girl shifted nervously. She didn't know if she was supposed to apologize again, or explain something she didn't fully understand herself. After a long moment, the director finally spoke. "That was unexpected," he said, his voice unsteady. "But it was extraordinary, truly extraordinary." She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The director hesitated, then gestured for her to come down. "Would you mind stepping closer for a moment?" he asked. She slowly made her way down the steps toward him. The applause had died down, but the atmosphere in the hall was still buzzing, full of energy and excitement. Everyone wanted to hear what would happen next. The director looked at her closely, almost studying her. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. She lowered her eyes. "I just practiced on an old piano at home whenever I could," she said quietly. "No one taught you?" He asked again. She shook her head. "I just play what I feel," she replied. The director let out a slow breath, almost a laugh mixed with disbelief. "You play what you feel, and somehow it sounds like this?" She wasn't sure if that was a compliment or confusion, but the director's expression softened within seconds. "Listen," he said gently, "I know I've been harsh today. I know I said something I shouldn't have. And for that, I truly apologize." Her eyes widened slightly. She had never imagined a man like him, someone respected and feared in the same breath, would ever apologize to someone like her. "But what you did," he continued, "is something rare, something I haven't heard in a long time. You didn't just play notes. You told a story." She felt her chest tighten with emotion. She wasn't used to praise. Most of the time, she went unnoticed. She helped her parents, worked part-time jobs, and kept her dreams tucked away, like old papers in a drawer. The director flicked a glance toward the musicians, and then back at her. "Would you consider something?" he asked. She blinked. "Consider what?" He paused, then said carefully, "Would you be willing to perform at our upcoming charity event?" The hall erupted again, this time in pure excitement. People whispered, gasped, and turned to each other with wide smiles. She should. She must. Did you hear that? A real performance. The girl's heart pounded. Me? She asked softly. Yes, the director said. You? He smiled faintly. If you're willing. She took a slow breath, her mind spinning. She had never performed in front of anyone before today. She didn't even know if she could handle the pressure of a real event. But then she remembered the sound of the applause, the way people's faces lit up, the way the hall felt alive as she played. For the first time in her life, she felt seen. I'll try, she whispered. The director's face brightened. Trying is more than enough, he said warmly. Before she knew it, people began approaching her. Musicians wanted to congratulate her. A few guests asked her questions, praising her talent. The older woman from the cleaning staff hugged her tightly. Unable to hold back her joy, everything felt unreal. The director spoke again, this time addressing the whole hall. Let's take a short break. After that, we will resume rehearsal. And young lady, please stay. We'll need to discuss your performance. People nodded, and small groups formed, discussing what they had just heard. The girl sat down on the edge of the stage, her legs feeling weak. She placed a hand over her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. All of this had happened so fast, but as she looked at the piano, she felt a quiet pull inside her. A soft, warm feeling. Like the piano wasn't just an instrument. It was a friend who had finally helped her speak. She took a deep breath and smiled to herself. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something, and for the first time, she felt excited to find out what would happen next. The news of her performance spread through the restaurant faster than she expected. People she had never served before came up to her just to congratulate her. Some told her that they had recorded her playing and already shared it with friends. Others simply offered warm smiles, the kind that said they witnessed something special. She was still standing near the piano, unsure what to do next, when the man who had approached her earlier walked back toward her with a calm but purposeful step. He introduced himself again, this time more clearly, and explained that he worked closely with musicians, helping them find opportunities. But he didn't talk in the way some people do when they want to sound important. He spoke with a relaxed tone, like someone who genuinely cared about what he was saying. He told her that her performance moved him in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. She couldn't find any words, so she simply nodded. He asked her if she had ever recorded anything, and she admitted she hadn't played properly in years. Life had pushed her dreams aside, leaving her unsure if that part of her still mattered to anyone. Hearing this, he told her something she would remember for a long time. Talent doesn't disappear. It only waits. The crowd slowly returned to their tables, but their conversations had changed. Instead of talking about business deals or weekend trips, they were talking about her, the quiet waitress who played like she carried a whole world inside her. She felt small under their attention, but at the same time, something warm stirred in her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. When her shift finally ended, she walked home under the night sky. The cool air helped settle her racing thoughts, but her heart still carried the sound of applause. She wondered if she had imagined everything. Maybe the moment was bigger in her head than it really was. But then she remembered the silence in the room, the way people had listened, and the way the man had spoken to her with genuine belief. The next morning, her phone buzzed nonstop. At first, she thought it must be a mistake, but then she remembered that some guests had recorded her. Her videos were being shared online. People she had never met were leaving comments saying she had touched their hearts. Some wrote that they listened to her performance on repeat. One message said, "This reminded me why music is beautiful." She read it twice. She went to work that afternoon, expecting everything to go back to normal. Instead, the manager approached her with an expression she had never seen on his face. He wasn't annoyed or rushed. He seemed proud. He told her the restaurant had received calls asking if the piano waitress would be performing again. She laughed softly, thinking it was a joke. But the manager was completely serious. For the first time, she felt like the shy version of herself was being overshadowed by a more confident part she had long forgotten. The manager then told her she could play again that evening if she wanted to. The idea scared her. Playing once was one thing, but doing it again, knowing people expected something from her, felt overwhelming. Still, she agreed. That evening, she dressed a little differently. Not fancy, not dramatic, just enough to make her feel like she was stepping into a new version of herself. When she walked into the restaurant, some staff members clapped quietly. They knew what she had done the night before, and they were rooting for her. As she sat at the piano again, she felt a mix of fear and excitement. The room filled quickly, and though she tried not to look, she sensed that many were there to hear her. She placed her fingers on the keys and took a deep breath. This time, the music came more easily. She wasn't playing because someone asked her to. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply sharing something honest. Her second performance was calmer, more thoughtful. She chose melodies that felt like conversation's soft notes that rose and fell like gentle waves. People listened just as quietly as the night before. When she finished, the room filled with applause again. It wasn't as shocking as the first time, but it felt just as meaningful. After her second performance, the same man approached her once more. He told her he wasn't offering empty praise. He truly believed she had something rare, something that could reach people. He asked her if she would be willing to meet with him the next week to talk about possibilities. She felt a swirl of emotions: excitement, fear, disbelief. But she said yes. Over the next few days, the world around her slowly started to shift. People recognized her when she walked to work. Some smiled at her like they knew her story. Friends she hadn't spoken to in years reached out to congratulate her. Her father, who had always wished she would return to music, looked at her with a pride that softened his tired eyes. When the day of the meeting arrived, she was nervous. The man greeted her kindly, and together they talked about her life, her past, and what she wanted for her future. She spoke honestly, telling him she had once dreamed of becoming a musician, but let go of that dream when life became heavy. He listened carefully, then explained that opportunities don't disappear. Sometimes they just show up later than expected. He offered to help her record a small performance, nothing fancy, just a simple piano session to share online. She agreed, and within a week, they recorded a video. It was filmed in a quiet room with soft lighting, and she played a piece that reminded her of childhood, gentle, warm, full of emotion. When the video was posted, she expected a handful of views. Instead, it spread quickly. People around the world commented on how her music made them feel calm, inspired, comforted. Some shared stories of how her playing helped them through hard days. She never imagined her music could reach so many hearts. Within a few months, her life had changed completely. She still worked at the restaurant part-time at first, but eventually, she began receiving invitations to perform in small events. They weren't grand concerts, but they were real steps forward. Each performance helped her grow more confident. She wasn't chasing fame. She wasn't trying to become a star. She simply wanted to share something meaningful with people who needed it. And people responded with kindness. Her journey wasn't perfect. She faced doubts, nervous moments, and pressure she hadn't known before. But every time she sat at the piano, she remembered why she started playing in the first place. She remembered the comfort music gave her. She remembered that one night when she nervously sat in front of a crowd and let her heart speak through the keys. Little by little, her name became known. Not because she was the best musician, but because she played with honesty. People felt her emotions, and that connection mattered more than anything. The restaurant that once saw her only as a quiet waitress now proudly displayed a small framed photo of her beside the piano. It reminded everyone that sometimes the most unexpected people carry the brightest light. And as her journey continued, she never forgot where it all started. The night she took a chance, the night she let herself be seen, the night she stepped from service to something far greater. She didn't aim for fame, but it found her anyway, carried gently by the sound of her own music. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be.